Hi, I'm Joanne Joseph, and welcome to the latest episode of The Blue Space. We're coming to you from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, and we find ourselves perched this morning on one of the tallest buildings in the country.
The East Africa corridor covers 8 countries. It'll soon be home to 500 million people sitting on some of the richest natural resources on the continent. While the rest of Africa is trying desperately to unlock growth, the East Africa corridor is powering ahead. What does its success mean for the rest of the continent? Let's find out in The Blue Space.
My name is Kiprono Kittony, and I'm a businessman, and I'm also the chairman of the Nairobi Securities Exchange.
My name is Patrick Mweheire. I'm the regional CEO for Standard Bank across East Africa, covering 6 countries.
What is current on my playlist in my car is Hugh Masekela. It's Otis Redding. It is Sam Cooke.
Oh, I've got some Afrobeats. I've got some jazz.
I'm a piano.
I love the Senegalese and Mali music.
What do you think of when you think of Africa?
I think of a very vast and diverse continent with a very young demographic.
It's got the history, it's got the landscape, it's got so much going for it. And I think it's also quite cosmopolitan and quite eclectic.
Welcome back to The Blue Space, brought to you by Standard Bank Corporate and Investment Banking. I'm Joanne Joseph, and today I'm joined in Nairobi by Standard Bank's Regional Chief Executive for East Africa, Patrick Mweheire, and Chairman of the Nairobi Securities Exchange, Kiprono Kittony. Gentlemen, lovely to be with you today, and thank you very much for making the time to chat. So, Patrick, let me kick off with you. I'd like you to please just give us a sense of East Africa as a region. What corridors exist here? Tell me how they enable trade, the movement of people, labor, currency, and the like.
Okay, I'm happy to. First of all, I think it's important to put this in context. The East African community started, almost 55 years ago. So we've been at this for a while. There was a small disruption in the 70s, but then we continually picked up from it again. So what you find is that there's a lot of connectivity and a lot of trade amongst all the 3 countries. Just to give you one perfect example, Kenya is the largest export market for Uganda. Uganda is the largest export market for Kenya. We don't see that kind of connectivity. And then there's been a lot of kind of understanding and collaboration all the way from the leaders, the presidents, the technocrats, the finance people, to sort of harmonize and make sure that the rules and all the unifying factors that make us successful continue to be. And there are many, many unifying factors. English and Swahili is a common language. We have a lot in terms of legislation that depends on each other. And there's continuous work in the background to make sure that we harmonize all the policies and that we allow to remove barriers. We have one-stop borders, at the moment where, goods and services can cross very, very easily on the border. And I just think that it's a fantastic job of collaboration.
I find that quite incredible, Patrick. I mean, I'm a member of SADC, as you probably know, Kiprono. We just haven't reached that point yet, but we certainly look to the East Africa corridor as a kind of signifier of hope for how we can start to cooperate in the future.
I have had the unique opportunity of being close to witnessing a lot of the developments in the integration of the East African region from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, and also from a social standpoint. Because in my previous capacity as the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Kenya, and in my current role, we have been actively involved in the leadership space on private sector. And like Patrick says, there has been a lot of work that's gone into it. And of course, we learned a lot from the pitfalls of the 1970s.
Right.
Our leaders have sat down to try to make this region work. And I think it is work in progress, and I'm sure, and I am convinced beyond a shadow of doubt, that we are at the cusp of a great renaissance. If we look at the competitive and the comparative advantages that each of the countries in the East African region present to each other, there's always something to be attributed to what each country can bring to the table. I'll give you an example. In the year 2000, the trade between Kenya and Uganda was 19-1 in favor of Kenya. In 2019, Uganda had a trade surplus over Kenya. And Kenya has the ports, access to the ports, and Uganda is a landlocked country. So if you look at that, it's a clear manifestation of the dynamism of our economies. And I think there has also been a lot of effort in dealing with the non-tariff barriers. One of the greatest sticky points in the cooperation between these nations has been the movement of goods at the border points. And this was resolved by a very simple treaty that was engaging by the countries of the East African region to have a one-stop border post. So today, if I'm going to cross into Tanzania, for argument's sake, at the port of Namanga, I don't need to go through to two different buildings.
Right.
The customs officials are in one facility, as are the immigration officials. So there's a lot of small things that have gone towards actually making this a reality.
It's really exciting stuff. I mean, Kiprono, can you give us a sense of how these transit and trade corridors are unlocking value for business as well as the local communities? Because I think the combination of those two is quite important.
Thank you. That's really a very important question that you've asked me. And a few years ago, Trademark East Africa financed an initiative to try and simplify cross-border trade in the East African region. And it began, first of all, with a protocol at the port of Mombasa that will reduce the amount of time that vessels will be docked in Mombasa.
Right.
It also reduces the amount of time that containers going into the hinterland, into the landlocked countries, and also into Kenya itself would be stationed in Mombasa. So it really worked on the flow of the goods. And the second thing that has been done is that the Northern Corridor Initiative, which combines all the 6 countries of the East African region, meet regularly under the auspices of the heads of state, with the Council of Ministers sitting beneath them. And their responsibility is basically to ensure that we have robust infrastructure deployed and also maintained. You see, the deploying of infrastructure and the maintenance of infrastructure are two different conversations. So there is a harmonization of policy in terms of ensuring that our road networks are efficient, our internet connectivity across the region, from the undersea connectivity in Mombasa and Dar es Salaam are deployed into the region effectively, that we have enough airports and rail connectivity through standard gauge rail across the region. Mombasa has been a pivotal point because that is a deep water port that serves Kenya, as Dar es Salaam serves Burundi and also parts of Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we have, all these countries are working concertedly to ensure that this infrastructure is robust enough to support trade and investment. The human resource protocols have also worked to ensure that there is a seamless flow of people across these regions. Today, I can fly to Dar es Salaam, as I will in a few days' time, using my national identity card. No need for a passport. Right. Similarly to Uganda and the rest of the region. That also helps in a great way. The other thing that I want to highlight is the fact that there is a dedicated deep water port in Lamu for the region. And that is even targeting to transport cargo northwards into Ethiopia.
But I see that before we leave this issue of the cross-border cooperation, tell me a little bit about this borderless banking, please, Patrick. I see it's also being used to facilitate the movement of currencies quite easily across borders.
Yeah. So, I mean, effectively what we've tried to do is to make sure that we reduce the time that we can send money across the countries. And that's a big benefit to a lot of the trade that happens. So you can seamlessly, within less than 10 minutes, get money across from Kenya to Tanzania and vice versa. And obviously our clients love that. The ability that also from a macro perspective, there is a little bit of harmonization in terms of interest rates, etc. The central banks all coordinate. We have an East African payment system as well that we're trying to push through. In fact, there is a goal to get us back to a monetary union where we go back to one currency across East Africa. So that's a discussion. We've gotten a lot on the harmonization of rates and policy and targets, but we still have that aspiration that we can go back to one currency across all these countries. And as you know, that would be significant because it reduces a lot of volatility and it allows for, even a freer moving of exchange goods and services as well. Yeah.
And I think it's something a lot of the countries on the continent are actually aspiring to right now, Patrick. I mean, and it seems like such a vibrant context in which to operate. I mean, you've got all these facilities, all these pipelines in place to facilitate such a lot of movement, create such opportunities within this environment. I mean, you can afford to truly be creative with the kind of infrastructure that you've put in place. Can you give me a sense of Standard Bank's activities within the region?
Yeah. So obviously, we, being one of the largest banks in Africa, have to support and really, in many ways, align with the goals of the countries. So when you look at some of the big infrastructure projects that Kip talked about, we try to play a role in those capital in supporting that. So energy and infrastructure is huge, both renewable and extractives. We also support a lot of the big, should I say, fintech space that's been created. And you know, Kenya, like, very, very innovative with the M-Pesa product, which to some extent has also been a competitor in sort of our banking services. But it has allowed all of us to sort of move up the digitization chain a lot quicker. So money can flow and payments can flow within the countries quite quicker than in any other places. So we also play a huge role in sort of supporting the SME ecosystem. And one of the things that we've been doing lately, which has been quite successful, is that we see an anchor client. For example, if I was to pick East African breweries, just as an example, and we sit down with them and have a discussion around their ecosystem. Who supplies you, who delivers and distributes for you, and can we sit down and then figure out a way in which that we work together? Because one of the biggest issues that we've faced has been the high cost of, should I say, borrowing for SMEs. So we've been working very closely with these large anchor clients to see how do we de-risk so we can lower the rates. And for example, in the East African breweries case, we were able to reduce what we were charging the SMEs by almost 40% because we had them on the table. So we had a tripartite and we were able to discuss that this is your ecosystem. If you want us to support this, we're going to do that. So, you know, give us that. So we're also trying to bring all those linkages across for our big anchor corporate clients. And it's working really, really well in terms of just allowing us to also be a banker for the SMEs in that space. Yeah.
I mean,
if I may.
Yes, please.
If I may, I mean, let me give a customer's perspective. And I'm not here to do any marketing for Standard Bank. But I was present when they came into the country maybe 20 plus years ago. And at that time, the image that Standard Bank had was that it was a corporate bank to bank the big corporates. But you know, to the spirit of East Africa, they have really taken up the innovative spirit. And there are three spaces that I would say Standard Bank has significantly, participated in. One is in agriculture. I mean, Standard Bank today is one of the foremost banks in providing solutions to, the rapidly growing economy space. Number two is in the technology space, as Patrick just said just now. They have been very actively involved also in banking the innovative companies that are playing in that space. And thirdly, of course, is the SMEs. I mean, you know that digitization is really on the upswing, and I think they have been one of the banks that have really been at the forefront in ensuring that there is seamless trade flows between the small and medium-sized enterprises, not just in country, but even cross-border.
That's really heartening. Yeah. Of course, everything we're talking about is what the African Free Trade Agreement is trying to achieve, right? We hear a lot about the AfCFTA, and Patrick, quite frankly, some people believe it to be a pipe dream. Others say it is possible to achieve in a number of years, over a certain number of decades. I mean, it's taken about 50 years for your region to be able to operate as optimally as it does. Well, would you say this can be achieved in our lifetime continentally?
I think, first of all, it was an incredibly ambitious project to do the AfCFTA. So the way I kind of look at it is that we have to take it in bite size, right? I think trying to ensure that you can have this one huge program, just initial, it's going to take a bit of time. And we've started to see some small wins where countries are beginning to have these, bilateral trade agreements. For example, there's one really good example I have. We have a lot of excess milk in Uganda. Recently signed a deal with Algeria to export that excess milk. Now, that's also part under the AfCFTA framework. But it is, how do we continue to have those sort of small wins without necessarily just thinking there's going to be a big explosion and a big end to the AfCFTA? So that's kind of how I look at it, and I feel like we're making progress. At least there's some real conversations that are happening between leaders in terms of how to get this going. But it will take time. It will take time.
But I think, the East African community, East African corridors, the entire East African region serves as a model to the rest of the continent. Kiprono, surely they can take a leaf out of your book.
I had a unique opportunity of being able to travel to many countries in my previous capacity in the Chamber of Commerce. And one of the things that really surprised me is the fact that Africa has not traded with Africa. If you travel to West Africa, for example, and you visit a supermarket in Nigeria, you will find that Nigerian supermarkets are mainly stocking dairy products from New Zealand and Australia. And in Kenya, we have a surplus of those very, very same products. So there is a need to have a concerted effort to break down the barriers to trade. When we tried to sign a special status agreement between our two countries, we met headwinds because of the ECOWAS region having to approve certain, or rather take away certain barriers to being able to enable us to travel. Take our goods there and vice versa, also to import petroleum products directly through that special status agreement into Kenya. So there are real practical examples of the challenges that the historical formations have presented. One very clear example also has been the sea routes. It's easier today to transport a container from the port of Mombasa to Felixstowe in the United Kingdom than it is to transport it to the port of Lagos because of the sea routes and the fact that there haven't been enough vessels plying those routes. And many of these vessels actually had detoured to other transit points in the global sea configuration. So there are certain low-hanging fruits. If you look at the collaboration today, for example, in the utility of energy resources, it's a perfect example of how East Africa is leading from the front. Ethiopia, with its Grand Renaissance Dam, will be exporting their surplus energy into Kenya. We import hydropower resource from Uganda. We shall be exporting our geothermal resources to other neighboring countries. So there is a close collaboration that is premised upon the competitive and the comparative advantages that each of these countries has. It's a long way coming, but I do believe that the journey has begun. And to quote and paraphrase Chinua Achebe, he said that if you want to walk fast, walk alone. But if you want to walk far, walk with others. So I think in this region we are walking together. And it's a perfect example for the rest of the continent.
It certainly is. I can't disagree with you at all there, Kiprono. Patrick, a closing thought from you. East Africa's growth points as you move forward, because it seems there's lots of room for expansion, despite what you've already achieved.
Yeah. So, we are the fastest growing region in sub-Saharan Africa. I believe we're going to achieve about 6.5% growth for the next couple of years, which is significantly larger than the rest of the continent. And that's without, some of the benefits of the big projects that are in the pipeline, technically Tanzania, etc. The FDI that we're beginning to see, which is, in my view, I think, basically shows you the positive sentiment that people see. Not just the bank. We're investing a lot in East Africa. We feel like it's one of our growth vectors from a geographic point of view. It's one of the top 3 that we've selected as a bank. But when we speak to our clients, it's a similar discussion. Like you opened up by saying almost 500 million people, GDP of about 500 billion, growing at 6-7%. With a lot of connectivity. It makes it so much easier for a regional corporate or an international, multinational to have that discussion. So I'm very, very optimistic about the future. We will continue to play our role in connectivity. We do have international presence in London and New York, etc., to support international clients as well that want to invest in East Africa. So I feel like we will continue to be a very good cog in the wheel in sort of driving this sort of growth as we move forward, and therefore enhance the growth rates that we are already beginning to see.
Well, you certainly are a beacon for the rest of us in this region and certainly for regions all over the world. I thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today, gentlemen. We have to wrap it up there today. That is unfortunately all we have time for. But what a fascinating discussion with these two gentlemen, East Africa Regional Chief Executive for Standard Bank, Patrick Mweheire, and Chairman of the Nairobi Securities Exchange, Kiprono Kittony. Thank you both for joining us for this really insightful discussion. From me, Joanne Joseph, to all of you across Africa and around the world, it's goodbye until we meet again here in the Blue Space.
Visit www.standardbank.com/bluespace to find out more about the Blue Space.